Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzz webinar, sponsored by Class Valuation, the 2023 Year in Review, with Scott Reuter, the Chief Appraiser at Freddie Mac, and Cristy Conolly, the EVP of Valuation Modernization at Class Valuation. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics, but Scott, why don't I turn it over to you and we'll get started.
Get myself off mute. You think I'd have that moved down by now. Hi, Jim. Thank you so much. And thank you to you personally, our friends at Appraisal Buzz, Class Valuation for sponsoring, and of course my friend Cristy Conolly. So it's always nice to be with her and do and focus on and have a discussion around industry events. And I think the main splash here in the headline was 2023, a year in review. And I thought about this earlier today, and the joke seems to be, how much time do we have? I think we accomplished a lot this year, and I know the mortgage origination volume was down, and I know the interest rates had a tremendous impact on that across the industry. But the work at the GSEs continued, along with the collaboration of partners like Class, and so we continued our modernization effort. There was a lot of joint work done by both Fannie and Freddie, continued work on the UAD, the Uniform Appraisal Dataset redesign, the UPD, the Property Dataset alignment. We had a number of Fannie-specific policy announcements, and there were a number of joint announcements. And I think there were a few that you wanted to highlight and call out in this webinar, and starting with AIR, the Appraiser Independence Requirements. And Cristy and I talked in our prep session about really what angle on AIR, and I think it's always helpful to kind of baseline in when it was created and why it was created. So AIR was a Fannie Freddie collaboration, first published I think over 13 years ago in October of 2010. So in August of this past year, the GSEs collaborated again and published updates to AIR and the AIR FAQs. And we also introduced PDCIR, Property Data Collection Independence Requirements. And I think this is significant. And I know I want to pose a couple questions here and talk with Cristy about this. But AIR basically, as we all know or should know, sets forth the standards to help kind of safeguard the independence, the objectivity, and the impartiality of appraisers and any of the other independent parties that are involved in the valuation process. And then the property data component that we've introduced does the same thing. So Cristy, you're on the front lines a lot more than I am. We interact with our clients and our customers and our seller base, our lender partners, but has there been any reaction maybe to AIR in general, or the introduction of the property data collection? Just some of your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Scott, and thank you also to Jim and Appraisal Buzz, and it's always great to connect with Scott. What we've seen is interesting with the property data collector independence requirements, since that was brand new this year. It's really been helpful for appraisers to be able to trust the data more with, hybrid and desktop appraisals. A lot of the questions out there from appraisers are, how can we rely on the data? How can we trust it? And I think the PDC independence requirements really helps provide trust for appraisers, because it's very similar, almost mirrors AIR, where, the property data collector is independent. Nobody can, pressure or influence them for specific things or ways to report the data collection or the condition of the property. They can't be on, certain people can't put them on lists or, remove them from eligibility for certain assignments. So they can trust that the PDC is completed independently and objectively, and, in a manner that the property data collector is just reporting things exactly as they see them. So I think that really goes a long way to help with the trust and reliability.
I appreciate that. And actually, you had reminded me of that when we chatted earlier, that that is an important component. I mean, I think there's a through line on a lot of these topics that do impact one another. And we've been out at an enterprise level talking about the appraisal and valuation modernization and the build out of the spectrum of products. And I think you make a very good point that, we hear from particularly a lot of appraisers that have concern as you're introducing this third party, this independent party that's going to collect data. We've tried to handle and address a lot of the concerns, and not only the appraiser responsibilities, but a lot of the concerns that we're hearing around consuming and utilizing that data. And I think, again, underscoring it yet again, I think you make a great point that hopefully the independence requirements will give the appraisers much more confidence in being able to utilize that. On the air side, and I don't know if this is problematic or if it's really had enough time to play out for you to see, but we were very deliberate in being explicit on the separation of loan officers, brokers, anyone affiliated with or compensated by loan volume. The separation of those job functions from the ordering piece. Is there been any industry reaction from where you sit? Did AIR help clarify that? I think that was clearly the intent. Maybe we'll start with that.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. I think there were definitely some gray areas, or what were perceived to be gray areas within AIR. So I think the updates definitely helped clarify and make it more black and white. So it was very clear. And from what I've seen in the industry and heard is just, using that to really educate and make sure everybody's on the same page and understands. And it was easy to help all parties involved really understand and be able to have their policies align with that once that clarification came out.
Yeah, I think that's important. We talked, the internal working teams talked, these requirements really weren't exactly new per se, but I think the policy may have been written or at least read in a way that was just vague enough that left some lenders comfortable to tread on territory they really shouldn't. So I think hopefully it did clarify that. And one other question that came to mind, and we didn't talk about this. I'm not really springing it on you live, but I am springing it on you live in terms of enforcement of AIR. And one of the things I think that is underappreciated is that there's actually more enforcement of AIR than I think the industry or particularly appraisers know or realize. Lenders and AMC involvement in complaints. You all are very proactive, I know, at the AMC and lender level on annual audits. And then we have a team at Freddie that performs annual operational reviews of our sellers, and one component of that is reviewing for AIR compliance. So is that kind of aligned with what you're thinking and what you see on the AIR side from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, AMCs definitely obviously have policies and procedures to comply with AIR to make sure their internal operations do. And, one of the responsibilities of AMCs is having those policies and procedures in place for lenders, because lenders are responsible for what their third parties are doing. So as an AMC, you have to comply and make sure you have policies in place and you're internally following them, and also making sure, that there's education out there for clients and lenders. If there's anything, questionable or gray, AMCs are a resource, and definitely review if there are complaints or investigations. AMCs have protocols in place and will definitely participate, whether it's from the client or from a state organization that maybe submitted a complaint, or if an appraiser reaches out to say, hey, we think AIR may have been violated. AMCs typically will have, that will go to a compliance team that reviews everything and really takes that seriously to make sure nothing's happening.
I'm glad. That's good insight. Again, not only where you sit now, but your state regulator, your state perspective. My eyes are the team I was part of at Bank of America a number of years ago. This was a part of what we did. Was we investigate. We're kind of the neutral party between the AMC and between the borrower, whomever was involved, and it was insightful to see kind of where the interpretation was clear, and then in the middle where it got fuzzy. So there was, and they all came in different shapes and sizes, as you would imagine. On the complaint side, from appraisers saying, well, somebody wanted to talk to me, and and then we would talk as a team. We said, well, they're allowed to talk to you. Those conversations are absolutely permitted, and in fact, I've always encouraged them. what they can't do, as we all know, is pressure you. So they can tell you, but in fact, it's smart. The smart appraisers, I think, either instinctively or adopt as a best practice, having conversations with everybody along the line. That's just you're casting the net at every one of those different intervals to get information. So anyway, that's important. I appreciate your insight. Jim, I know we talked about a couple of
yeah, you kind of led into that. So
here.
we are seeing a lot of questions on social media about what is pressure and what's not. So we pulled together some of the common themes that we're seeing. So I'm going to start polling, and this is where it's going to get interactive with our audience, where you're going to tell us what you think is a violation and what's not. So the first one we're posting is, can an AMC on a refinance appraisal assignment order specify or an estimated or target value? And the question is a yes or no question. Can they specify an estimated or target value when they give you the assignment?
So this is one, while that's coming up, Cristy and I laughed about, because I used to see the faxes come in back in the day with, particularly on a refinance, a big number that was targeted or highlighted. I see the poll up on my screen, Jim. I assume that means it's up.
Yep.
Yeah, Scott and I were talking about, for those appraisers, I'm sure there are a lot of here back in the day when we used to get the orders via fax machine. There was a typical form that usually came over and it had an estimated value field.
Yeah.
That looked very different than what the orders are today.
Many times with instructions to call.
We've got quite a few responses. There are a couple people that said that they are allowed to do that, and that's not acceptable. But for the majority said 98% said no, they're not.
This feels like, I don't want to say it feels like a blurred line. You're going to look through AIR FAQs. I don't know if they specifically address this question, Jim, but that feels like pressure to hit a number. I think the appraiser in me would say, well, when I do a purchase transaction, I get a contract. It's got the price. It's got all the information there. And I think that is it just behaves a little differently because of the appraiser's responsibility to review that contract for terms, conditions, any concessions, anything else that may be embedded there. But this feels like a line that might be going too far.
All right, let me bring up the next Q&A, or the next poll. So this one says, can a realtor leave a packet of comps at the home when the appraiser comes to do the inspection? So what we were seeing on social media is that the appraisers were saying, by the realtor having comps for me, that's influencing my value and not letting me be independent. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So we do hear that a lot, and we see that a lot. And a realtor, I don't want to impact the results of the poll, but a realtor providing sales, first of all, they're not comps unless the appraiser decides they're comps. So the realtor can provide sales to show what they use to list the property, what kind of market data they have, what their information is to give to the appraiser. It's not an AIR violation to just hand that to the appraiser. Then the appraiser can do what they want with it. They're not being pressured. They're not being told this is what they have to do. The appraiser can look at it, not look at it, choose to use them as comps, choose to look at them as irrelevant sales. It's completely up to the appraiser.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think as an appraiser, it's just a little bit of a tangent, but I hope, and I think it's on point, is we have an opportunity to kind of raise our profile in a good way during that whole engagement process. And that's through being open to take data. To Cristy's point, they're sales. They're not comps until we deem them to be comps. Maybe north of 90% of the time, it's going to be data that you already knew, didn't considered but didn't develop for obvious reasons or whatever. But I think it goes a long way on the PR and customer service front to politely take them and actually look at them, because you might find a gem. And then even all the other stakeholders along the way, have conversations with the realtor. I was at the foundation meetings in Virginia here recently, bumped into an appraiser friend I've known for many years on this topic. And he said, you know what I used to do? He says, when I would talk to the realtor, when, we'd have that discussion, he said, I would ask them what homes other homes they showed them and other homes they chose not to show them. In other words, there was even some insight that the appraiser could gain through kind of understanding that whole purchase process on a sales transaction. So I thought that was pretty clever. And there's just a lot of ways just by being open and engaging in that level of conversation.
Well, it looks like 95% of the people responded and said this is acceptable, and 5% said that's a violation. So,
well, good. I think we're grounding hopefully in the right part of the poll there. And yeah, I would say for the few that maybe had thought it was not and had a bad experience with it, again, I think it's up to the line of pressure. I think the appraiser really controls that. If you were given that packet of information with, you know, your arm being twisted and some other pressure, then it's not okay. But that pressure is separate and distinct from just the realtor giving you a packet of information for consideration.
Well, this next question is going to kind of go into our next topic, and this is on reconsiderations of value. So this one is, do reconsiderations of value from the AMC or lender violate appraiser independence? So we'll give some time for everybody to answer that. But I know, Scott, you've been doing a lot with the OCC Project REACh. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know this question was next, but it ties nicely from appraiser independence world into the reconsideration of values. And we have Freddie Mac has not only participated but been able to provide leadership for the past couple of years on the OCC Project REACh effort on ROV, the reconsideration of value. There's a lot of people across the industry that are working on this. The enterprises I know we're working on it across HUD, the IAG, and of course the OCC. Pardon me, is leaning in through their effort on Project REACh, basically to provide the industry a transparent, consistent, standard process that they could follow on ROVs. And putting my appraiser cap on for the moment, I can 100% appreciate this and endorse this from an appraiser level. Again, I get out a lot in the industry. I know Cristy does as well, and I talk to a lot of appraisers. And when the topic pivots to ROV, generally the thing that's fresh in their mind is the last ROV that went poorly, that came in with hundreds of sales, not comps, and all the other associated incumbent responsibilities for the appraiser to respond to that, but not really anything substantial. So the hope is kind of pivoting to the larger ROV discussion. I think it's important to the industry for the above mentioned. I think a standard process would help both ends to the middle, so to speak, right? It's clearly from the consumer and the borrower side. There needs to be an awareness that they have a right to dispute an appraisal. That was a lot of our first year work, the 2022 work at the OCC Project REACh effort you mentioned. So aligning, ensuring again that the borrower, it's fully disclosed they have the right to dispute an appraisal. But this year's work, we've really gotten our up to the elbows in what does that look like. And I think I'm very excited. We're not publishing yet. We have a best practice white paper we'll be forwarding to the OCC probably later this week. That is in final draft. That will basically detail the process that we're as a committee and group recommending that the industry follow. And I think it's going to be good news for appraisers. I think it's going to be great news for lenders. And I think it's going to be positive for borrowers and consumers, starting with identifying the error, the calculation that was missed, the material defect, the sale that wasn't utilized, whatever that item or items are, they need to be identified up front. And all the way through the process, and defining that there's one ROV per loan transaction, defining that an ROV is a consumer-initiated ROV. I think there are some folks that utilize the term for any back and forth on an appraisal, whether it's with the underwriter or the bank or the lender. We're not considering that an ROV. That's just answering and addressing some underwriter concerns. This will start and is going to be defined as a consumer ROV from when the borrower is disputing an appraisal, and they must have reasons and data that they draw the appraiser's attention to. And with respect, it can't just be you're unhappy with the number. We've all had things in life we're unhappy about, and I don't mean to suggest that this is not an area they should be unhappy. If they have a low value, if they've got if they believe something was materially missed, if there was an error in the report, there's data they want the appraiser to consider. This will be a format to do that, and then the inbound request on the appraiser side will then be able to be addressed in kind. There's a whole list of standards, and anyway, that's kind of been the focus at the OCC level. So I'll turn it over to Cristy real quick. And how do you all handle ROVs, and do you have a standard process? And do you, maybe it's a loaded question, do you think the industry would benefit from some guidance or an industry standard or best practice around ROVs?
Yeah, I do. And I think most AMCs now have a standard process and a form. If some lenders have a standard form that they use, I know, we have a form at class, and a lot of other AMCs do as well, that really outline what's compliant for an ROV, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And to your point, Scott, there has to be information and data, not just we think the value is low. There's not much you can do with that. So we do have a process, and we have a team of licensed appraisers on staff. And again, most AMCs have a similar process as well, where they'll review and they'll work directly with the appraiser to review the information and respond, to provide a response back to the client. I think what we have seen change, and this kind of falls in line with the Project REACh and with the PAVE report, where there's a lot. I think it would be great to have consistency across the industry. While there is some consistency right now, there isn't a standard. And so I think if it's clear for everybody what the standard is, it would go really well. But what we have seen since the PAVE report has come out, and really with information going out to consumers, that there is a right to question and dispute the appraisal. We are just explaining a lot of that to appraisers. Sometimes they don't necessarily haven't read those articles or seen that that's happening, and they want to only respond if it's coming from the underwriter. And to your point, it can come from multiple different parties, and there is still a process that has to be followed. It still has to be air compliant. Can't have undue pressure or items that aren't necessarily relevant to the appraisal. It has to be relevant and factual. But there's definitely been a little bit of a shift in how they're processed, I think.
That's helpful. That's important, and I appreciate that. And again, I think my opinion, Scott Reuter's opinion, I think the industry will benefit from this. And I know there had been, as long as I've been around in the industry, there's been ROVs, and I think they are important. They've been important, but they've been problematic without this level of guidance. And actually, I don't think we can talk about this topic without calling out my friend John Brennan, who, when he was with the foundation, he was way ahead of his time, and published a great white paper and that dealt with just this topic. So I'm glad the industry's coming around to it, and we're spending the time and devoting the attention to it. And Jim, I think that we ever get a consensus on your question, the ROV, does the ROV violate appraiser independence? So
yeah, and so 99% said no. And we had a good Q&A that came in about that from Bob. I'm not going to attempt his last name, Bob. You know who you are. Considering ROVs, they have the right for reconsideration, but they should not expect it to automatically be free. How do appraisers handle that? Is the ROV part of the original assignment? Is this something that they can have a charge for as they process the extra work that goes through that?
So that
Did I ask a really tough question?
Yes. So that's a business agreement that the appraiser has with their client. So when they accept the assignment, that's typically part of the agreement they have with their client for the assignment conditions for that assignment.
Yeah, I was purposely trying to stay quiet and let Cristy go first, because she sits a little closer to this, but because I've only heard anecdotally and just bumping into a couple of other big AMCs that handle it exactly that way. It's in their broader master engagement with the appraisers on their panel that this is a part of, and it's not another fee or chargeable event. And I guess again, both sides kind of to the middle on this. I appreciate the appraiser sentiment that what the heck, I get these, they come in, I've got to spend time, and I think and I'm not going to put words in Bob's mouth, but the way I kind of react to some of the sentiment behind that question is without this structure, I get it, right? Because then you're potentially your inbox could fill up with requests that really aren't potentially fully documented or maybe legitimized reconsiderations or disputes. With this process, with a standard that we hope the industry aligns with, the enterprises align with, our friends at HUD across the board, that it will be incumbent on that borrower, that consumer, to actually come up with reasons, come up with data. They utilize and we'll be able to utilize, real estate agents or another, anyone they can act as an advocate that understands the business to put this together. I also think parenthetically that could be a point where some of these won't even materialize. Okay, you're unhappy with the value. Now, what did they miss? Well, no, they measured everything fine. Where's the material defect or the GL? No, that was all calculated great. They didn't miss anything. Where's the data? I don't have anything. All of a sudden you start going down the list. I think with respect, understanding that there could be questions around it that may not even turn into an ROV. So it's speculation at this point, but I think tying back to the larger point, I think the industry is going to benefit from this, and it's a great question, and we've heard it a lot from other appraisers.
So we had another. Oh, sorry, Cristy.
That's okay. I was just going to say, I saw a question come in from Steve asking about the timing of the ROV making a difference to AIR, and whether if it was received prior to delivery of the appraisal or after delivery of the appraisal. That's actually a really good question that I'm not sure I've heard before. You really can't have an ROV prior to delivery of the appraisal because you don't know what the value is until you have the appraisal. And you certainly can't dispute it if you haven't reviewed it to see if there are actual, factual errors or discrepancies or concerns with it. So if somebody were approaching you about value prior to delivery of the appraisal, that would be an AIR violation.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, Cristy. It's a great call out because I don't have the document up. We're just having a conversation. But one of the things I know that we're going to call out, at least it's in the draft now for the OCC paper, is being very clear on the lender responsibilities. And our lender friends play an important role here in the screening and the review and ensuring the dispute has gone through a full internal review before it gets to the appraiser. In other words, they're going to be the ones that are going to determine whether it is documented and worthy enough of a review to get to the appraiser for reconsideration. And one final word on the other side of the conversation, outside our industry looking in, about the fee topic yet again, was I've heard discussion. It's like, well, if something was missed, we're all human, appraisers are human, believe it or not. So if something was missed, and we appraiser missed something, and then okay, wasn't aware of that comp. I did mismeasure this, and now I have an opportunity to get back into that report. Is that really an additional fee that a consumer should have to bear? So it's a question more than anything, but I'm just saying we've actually heard that. So
our next question was just, what I'm going to start this poll. What percentage of your work are you receiving a reconsideration of value on right now? So we just split it up into fourths, 0 to 25% of your work, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or 76 to 100%. So we want to know from the appraisers in the audience, how many of these are you getting? Are you getting these on a daily basis, or how frequently are they coming in?
I'm anxious to see the percentages here.
Well, while those poll results come in, Joe Pravatone said, Scott, will this ROV guidance be released to the public, and where can we find it once it's released?
In order, yes, and I don't know yet. So yes, all this will clearly be released to the public. Our friends at the OCC who have collaborated this broader equity initiative, which ROVs and the valuation workstream are a part of, we've yet to determine where these will reside, potentially in multiple places. But the important point and answer your first question is absolutely yes. We're going to, and then look for us in particular to be messaging on this likely next year pretty aggressively to the industry and to appraisers, so that there's clear understanding of the alignment that's being suggested. How we look, Jim?
So on the poll, it looks like we've got about 95% say that this is less than 25%.
Okay.
4% say it's 26 to 50%, and then 1% on both 50 to 75 and 1% on 76 to 100.
Okay, so the majority's low. I actually like that. And there's been like offline conversation of whether clarification of a process will increase the number of ROVs requests. I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe there's no measurable change in the way the market currently reacts to them, but there's be more guidance and specificity around how that happens.
Well, and we can always come back to some of these questions on this topic. I do see that there's a lot of questions, but I want to move on to the next topic we were going to discuss, was the problematic words and phrases. And Scott, I know that you've done a lot of presentations on this, so I'll let you get started on, what this means for appraisers.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim. And yes, we've done a lot of messaging across articles, webinars, podcasts, links, resources, in terms of trying to message early and often to the industry around the use of problematic words and phrases. And I don't have it up here, but it actually ties to our guide. We have a whole section in our seller servicer guide which addresses unacceptable appraisal practices, including the use of problematic words and phrases, from whether it's just vague, non-descriptive wording that's difficult to understand, to potentially coded and veiled, to explicitly problematic. And we've spent a lot of 2023, the broader team, looking at the words, the firings, the individual use of words, the contextualized use of words, really trying to perfect as much as we can, at least through the first release, where this is going to be meaningful and where we need to remind our appraiser friends. We've been in a warning message environment most of the year, when we kind of proof that we are learning, testing, and adjusting as needed. Early in the year, we had set an October date of 2023 of when warning messages would go fatal. So it would actually prevent a report from being submitted. Candidly, coming out of the late summer, we were still perfecting the list. We were ingesting a lot of feedback from our clients, customers. Our internal team was working. Anyway, it's a long way to say we actually shortened the hits by broadening the list and contextualizing uses of words like, I think a high fire word was Indian, but Indian Wells, Indian Springs, Indian Lake, when it's used as a descriptor, that absolutely shouldn't fire. But if it's used to identify, a race, ethnicity, a protected class, that's not permitted. So we've been able to kind of perfect that, and I anticipate we're going to continue to do that. So that's a long way to say the evolution of the work in 2023 has led us up till now. January of 2024, the explicit words will go fatal. So, and our AMCs, like Class and others, have been great partners. And I'll give Cristy a chance to jump in here. Yeah, we've been out there early, often, and tried to be very much in front of the industry in terms of just not only update what we're doing, but try to really provide some practical guidance. So, Cristy, I know you guys have been on the front end screening for a lot of this and being good partners with us. And what are you seeing? And I'd love to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, this is definitely something that kind of has really evolved, as you mentioned, over 2023. And I think it's really in a good place now where there has been so much information put out there about it. You guys have done such a good job. Jim's point, you have been out speaking at conferences and different, events with appraisers and newsletters and things. And I think there's, two different ways we're looking at it, where some of the words are subjective, where they're not necessarily, it's a biased word, it's just subjective. Mm-hmm. And what's being looked for now is really objective, commentary and details to describe something. And then there's a scenario where there could be a word that is actually biased. I think, I'm not sure how many of the appraisers watching have read the FHFA report, where they reviewed a lot of appraisals and provided some examples from commentary that were in appraisals that were clearly biased. But for the most part, it's just this subjective terminology that I think appraisers has been really receptive to it. And they understand that it's actually improving the report writing to really provide details and descriptions that are factual and objective, rather than the subjectivity. It's really easy to understand when you look at the bigger picture and kind of where it's coming from and what's being looked for. And in June, when the SSR warnings first started coming out, we were seeing certain words flag a lot, and we've been educating our appraiser panel and obviously working with Freddie and others on why those words shouldn't be included. So we see it flag a lot less now. Like, it's definitely, I think the industry is understanding and kind of evolving with it.
Yeah, and you can say Fannie Mae. That's okay if you're working with them too. So yes, and you're right. So those different buckets that I spoke of, and you're right. So I've had appraisers. We saw early firings, high firings of desirable and attractive. Those are words we appraisers love, right? So desirable, attractive, convenient. Walking distance, and right. So those are just subjective, vague, and not really helpful. So walking distance to you might be different to me to somebody else. So we messaged pretty aggressively on that. The next bucket up is where it gets a little more problematic when you're talking about good schools, crime-ridden, pride of ownership. Some terms that I'm old enough. I've seen these in reports a long time, and I think appraisers just need to be careful. And if there are opportunities, particularly in our largely free-form text form that we're still going to be utilizing for a while, to use words to describe, take that extra second to see if there's a more objective way that you can describe that, and you'll, I think, bring yourself a lot less scrutiny and post-submission review. One of the things I know I didn't fully appreciate as a practicing appraiser was the journey my report was going to go on after I already sent it to the client. And naively, as a young appraiser, you do it for your local bank, you send it off, great, it's done. That is nowhere near done. And that's just to say there's levels of scrutiny and review. If it gets sold to one of the enterprises, there's additional scrutiny and review. I could go to a state regulatory board. You could go a variety of places that different, fresh sets of eyes, not all of which may be appraisers, can read and potentially read into reports. So anyway, I've said many times, I don't think, again, Scott Reuter's opinion, I don't think appraisers wake up every day thinking of ways that they can exert bias and discriminate against people. I just don't think they do. But what I do think is real is implicit bias, and the fact that it can creep into some of our reporting, and the words, vague words, are just going to be a much weaker, less credible report. So anyway, that kind of puts a bow on that. But anyway, thank you to the broad industry. We've had a lot of appraiser feedback. We've had a lot of great interaction with our lenders and AMCs over the year, and I like the way you put it. I think we're in a good spot, and the work still goes on. So Jim, anything lighting up on your side?
I know when you're bringing
kid?
that up, I started realizing, I live by the Indian River Bay, and down the road is Black Iron Lane. So I'm sure that there's a lot when people are doing appraisals in my area that it's thrown up. So, and I think that just shows that, we have to know what's in it, and we can't just use, AI crawlers. You have to actually understand what's being said.
Yes.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
that brings up a good point. And, in the comments, it looks like Beth said, please let us use the word old, as in the furnace is 10 years old. There is context reviewed. So sometimes I think, to Jim's point, AI can identify certain words that might be potentially biased or subjective, but there should always be an actual human review of the context to determine, was it used in a subjective or biased manner, or was it used, to explain a 10-year-old furnace, which would be okay. So context is definitely looked at and relevant also.
Absolutely. Location, age, we've got some language too in our guide that it only becomes problematic when those are used in a manner that has a discriminatory effect. So again, yeah, just be careful. Absolutely use the word if it's appropriate. You're not using it in a discriminatory fashion, but just be careful. And again, the checkpoint for me is that split second you can pause and look at the word and think, is there a better way to describe this more factually? The Pleasant Hill schools are, within walking distance of the subject. That's an opportunity to drop in a mileage. It's 1/10 of a mile from the subject property. So
speaking of, school districts, so we have a poll question. It says, is it okay to use language directly from the MLS listing in my appraisal? So, I know that we see this a lot where people, see the realtors use this, so I can just drop and paste this into my appraisal report.
Yeah, again, I'm almost like Cristy before. I don't want to influence the voting, but yeah, we almost need a third box, right? C for maybe. I don't know, Cristy. I think this is one where, there's some learned behavior and evolved behavior that a lot of appraisers have developed. And one is utilizing sources, and that's not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing, but utilizing online sources to gather information. But I sat in Pete Christensen's, Val Expo or Summit presentation on the appraisers that he was defending that copy and pasted from Wikipedia and didn't give it a second thought. And I throw a little bit of that over into this MLS question that Jim posed, that you just have to be careful. Our realtor friends may use language from a marketing perspective, and that we need to be careful. About. So what's the appraiser in you say?
That is exactly where my mind went to, is to Peter Christensen's presentations, regarding Wikipedia, where if you're going to, copy and paste from anywhere, you need to really read what you're pasting and the content of it. And, you may need to revise it or filter it a little bit. Just kind of copying and pasting as a description, assuming it's okay because it's saying, per the realtor, per the MLS, still could lead to problems. So anything that you're pulling from other sources should be really reviewed and considered.
Yeah.
Jim,
I would say this poll is probably the closest one we've had. So 21% say it's okay, 79% say you shouldn't use it. But I think for what we're hearing is just understand what you're putting in your report. It's okay to read it.
And I would also say, is it relevant, right? Just in general within, an appraisal report, just putting something in there for the sake of putting it in there, like, does it provide a benefit? Is there relevance to the appraisal report, to the conclusions and development, to the intended user that you're providing it for them?
Yep, I love that. Yep, absolutely. And so maybe that's a way to say none of them are necessarily wrong, and all of them might be necessarily right if it's looked at and viewed through that lens.
This is a question from Jeff Rolland. He asks about, when using Google Maps, all religious facilities are labeled, and I have a difficulty removing them. Is that something that they need to do in their appraisal?
Well, Jeff knows better than to ask that question on a live webinar. It's a good question, actually, Jeff. And I don't know that we explicitly address it. Cristy, do you have a best practice on your side of the table when appraisers import a map that's got some of the religious facilities identified?
What I've seen in these scenarios is similar to how they'll handle religious photos or items in homes, where they can, kind of blur it out so that you can't see exactly what it's saying, kind of to remove the opportunity for any type of, discrimination or fair housing violations. That's one way to approach it. I think as we kind of get further along down the road, maybe next year we do 2024 year in review, there'll probably be new technology that will automatically pull those out. But since it is kind of still something that's evolving, that's one way I've seen appraisers handle it.
Yeah, and I'll take, I know you likely are getting more questions than we'll be able to get to, but I'll take that back for Jeff to our team and follow up independently, because I think it's a really good question.
The next topic we were going to talk about was supporting your adjustments. So Scott, I'll let you talk a little bit about that and everything that's going on with appraisers having the correct support for their adjustments.
Yeah, so we could probably do an hour on this, but so, developing and supporting your adjustments is, and I've said it before, it's the backbone of your appraisal. It absolutely is where you drive your development off of. So whether or not whatever you're considering, whether it's any differences across the grid, whether it's market conditions analysis and adjustments you're going to drive off of rapidly changing markets, you absolutely need to either incorporate it in the report or have it in your work file. And it's increasingly an item that that's being triggered in both QC and our AQM, our appraiser quality monitoring efforts. And a lot of appraisers do a good job. I want to level set and say that, but we're seeing, more than not, under the current reporting structure, just appraisers that are not really leading the reader to, where they developed, derived, and support that adjustment from. So, Cristy, what are you seeing on your side at the appraisal desk at class?
Yeah, so it's something, similar to the subjective terminology, where we're definitely seeing from lenders a lot more in-depth underwriting, kind of reviews and conditions coming back. They're really looking for more detailed commentary and support for adjustments or for lack of adjustments, and for the reconciliation, which I know is a little bit different than the adjustments, but obviously kind of all ties together. I think, just what we're seeing moving forward with all the new technology and tools that appraisers have, but also that lenders and underwriters have, they have a lot more insight into different market conditions and data. So they're looking for the appraisers to provide that information as well. Appraisers have more data and technology that they're able to have. And they don't want to just hear, well, because I am in this market and I've been working in this market for 30 years, and that's why the adjustment is that, or it isn't that. They want to see the data and the details surrounding it. And one thing that we always suggest to appraisers that's really helpful, there's, multiple different tools out there for appraisers, and DataMaster is just one example that really helps analyze markets and provide support for adjustments that can be plugged right into the appraisal reports. That's really helpful if appraisers use those tools, understand how they're able to assist and, are able to incorporate that into their reporting and into their support. We see that as a really helpful tool, not only with underwriters, but I've also seen that, just when there's reviews on appraisals, when there might be complaints submitted at different levels, the more data in the work file or, in the report, depending on where it's appropriate to have it, really helps, kind of protect the appraiser with when they can support with data that's very clear and understandable.
That's a great point, Cristy. And I've heard, and you mentioned one, DataMaster Spark. I know there's others. And boy, what a different world from when I was in the field, and the import functionality with MLS. And so appraisers do have more abundant data and data sources to be able to support these adjustments. And it came to mind hearing you comment, from like an LCA rules perspective from Freddie Mac, it inures to the appraiser's benefit to have and provide and develop at least that a little bit additional support into the body of the report, because there are a lot of markets where the only insight we have is maybe at a higher index level that is indicating movement one way or the other, and that may be a bump that they do against the data or the analysis that the appraiser does or doesn't provide. That could fire if it's discrepant. So that's one reason. So maybe there's a percentage of times you're going to bring yourself a little less GSE pain if you just address it up front, and you'll be developing a much more sound and credible appraisal. But also just have that in case your market or submarket is divergent from what we may see at a MSA or an index level, and you may be, no, that's fine. I know the index says this, but this market, just have your support. That's exactly the value add for the appraiser, and that's exactly what we want them to do. Okay, Jim, anybody lighten you up on your side of the?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions. So well, while we talk about some of these questions, our final poll is a short answer. So, we're going to let some people type out, so it may take them a little longer. But we wanted to ask them, what would you like to see Freddie Mac do in 2024 for appraisers? So, I want to give some people, keep that open, give some people time to answer that. We got a lot of people that do say that this needs to be a whole webinar just on supporting adjustments. So I appreciate that, Michelle.
There's your next topic, Jim.
There's your next webinar. That's right.
Cristy, do you want to handle this one from Toby?
Let me see. I mean, I can kind of speak to it a little bit. I think it might be, I don't know, Scott might want to weigh in as well on what they're looking for at Freddie Mac. The question is, what is meant by data, and how many appraisers provide actual data, and that the tools like Spark or Data Master, this is from Toby, they show graphs and summaries, but that would need to be imported separately into the report. So I can't speak to exactly how each one of those tools works. I know a little bit about them, and I know that we've seen really good success with them, but I'm not intimately familiar with all of them. So you may have to import some of the data and the information that they provide, or some of the analysis that they help with as a separate addendum into the report. I know some of the data gets automatically entered. But the data that is being referred to, like I said, it actually would be data. So if you did a paired sales analysis, having the data to actually show where that came from, not just, saying, well, I did it by paired sales, and then when asked for additional support, there isn't any to support it. That's something that I do see a lot of. And I don't know, this is also something that's, coming from the GSEs, which is, as Scott mentioned, they're really looking at things from a quality monitoring standpoint. And that's why lenders are getting more interested in it and looking for more information. So Scott, I don't know if you have anything to add to that with, specific, defining the data. It's kind of broad because it will vary from report to report.
It is broad. So it is broad. It'll differ from market to market. And as a starting point, and I don't mean this to be smug, many appraisers just need to do something, right? I mean, take that stab in your market, identify what metrics you're going to capture. If it's closed sales, if you're looking at listing inventory, days on the market, if you're trying to develop, you're analyzing the market conditions. And, we had crazy upward pressure on market conditions, as we all know, in 2020, 2021. Now we're in a very different market, but really across all markets, the market's talking to us all in more ways than closed sales transactions. And I think many appraisers just go to that one stop of the closed data. And nationwide in the crazy 2020, 2021 COVID boom, I mean, markets nationwide were increasing 18%. I think dividing 12 into that's 1.5 points a month. I mean, so just at a high level, the markets, there are adjustments that the appraisers could derive and support and defend and develop a much more credible appraisal with market data. So kind of ties back to data. I think we really look to the appraiser for that, and we're going to continue to look. Market conditions are a main focus that, again, we don't see a lot of a majority of the time. A lot of appraisers really taking time to do the market conditions analysis and develop and support the adjustments. We're in, Cristy introduced a point, I'll introduce one here on buy downs and seller concessions, in a down market. And we're seeing a lot more buy downs and seller concessions that we have concern that aren't really being fully considered by the appraiser. And this happens a lot in new construction. And again, so it's just we trust the appraiser for an awful lot, and we're going to be emphasizing a lot of these key points again to market support, developing adjustments and the. Yep.
And then the other one, I know we've done a whole hour on this topic with the short-term rentals, but I basically want to know, are residential appraisers able to do short-term rental appraisals, or is that something that should be commercial?
I would say that is a great coming attraction. We have heard from across the industry, and I again, with the appraiser cap on, I feel a lot of the pain that appraisers are experiencing in the short-term rental space, in terms of how to do the analysis, what they're allowed to do, what they're supposed to do. Our guide's pretty clear, at least on what we'll accept, but I understand that is very distinct and different from what a lot of appraisers are being asked to do. And so I don't want to avoid the question, but we're really we've already got the teams engaged, including our marketing, communications, and PR teams, to make sure, at least from a Freddie Mac perspective, we can give some clear or rather clear guidance on really the practical steps on the STRs, because I know it's a hot topic to the question.
Well, there's a bunch of questions, but we won't have time to get through all this. We really appreciate Scott and Cristy giving us their time. I thought this was a really fun webinar with all the interactivity, with all the questions that came through. If you have more questions for them that you really want answered, you can reach out to comments@appraisalbuzz.com and we can forward them over. Scott and Cristy, do you have any final words before we sign off?
Just thank you for your time.
Yeah, great year. Thank you across the industry for the collaboration. Thank you at Appraisal Buzz, our friends at class, and we're looking forward to a great 2024.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we're already at the end of the year and it's going to be 2024 in less than 2 weeks. But thank you all so much for joining us. And once again, thanks for class for sponsoring. This was a great webinar, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.